Hi everyone, welcome to Module 3. I wanted to do a real quick video for you. If the audio is not that good, I apologize. I'm in New Orleans and I took off without the computer that I normally use. I'm trying to use some little microphone headphones and the quality might not be amazing. I apologize for that. Okay, so I'm going to try to do this real quick. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Mississippian cultural period, which is what I specialize in, and I think I could do hours of videos on that, and I know that's not what you want to hear, so I'm going to try to quickly get us through here, but I did want to talk to you just a little bit. So this week they've got you looking at two chapters, 6 and 10, and your discussion is wanting you to talk about kind of climate change and domestication of plants. So let's talk about that for just a little bit. I want to talk about the domestication of plants mostly, and then just a little hint of animals. So first, the Neolithic Revolution. So this is also called the Agricultural Revolution. It's mostly considered when we kind of stepped away from hunting and gathering and shifted our focus more on being able to domesticate certain plants that were maybe giving us the most surplus or whatever exactly we were needing that particular plant for at that time. We got really good at figuring out how to select like the best plants, the biggest plants, or the ones that were producing the most, and keep that going to get away from the smaller, more wild plants. If you ever do a search like on the wild plants of, I don't know, just like pick a vegetable or something, and you see kind of its predecessor to the one that we have now. They're always normally smaller. Sometimes they're different colors. Sometimes you open them up and there's like millions and millions and millions of seeds and not much there for you to eat. So humans learned how to kind of pick and choose which plants they wanted. You know, if they wanted less seeds, if they wanted bigger, um, vegetables or whatever they were wanting to do, they figured out how to work that. And it's very amazing. You also have to think about the fact that they figured out what was poisonous and what was not. I had a friend who was a botanist, and her favorite saying was, let's see exactly how she put it. If you asked her like, "Oh, is that poisonous? Is that poisonous?" She would say like only once, which is true, right? It's poisonous and you eat it. Only poisonous to you once because you're not around to discover if it's poisonous the second time. So someone had to figure that out. All right, so the Neolithic Revolution kind of started in the Middle East. Again, this is when we kind of shifted. We're going to talk about that a little more in just a second, but for now, I'm going to say we shifted from hunting and gathering um, more to agriculture instead of being as nomadic, kind of started being sedentary, hanging out in one place. This happened due to climate change. Um, that's kind of a political buzzword at the moment, I know, with people kind of all over the spectrum on how they feel about that. But climate change kind of is said to have facilitated this jump in agriculture because we were starting to come out of the ice age into a more warming period, which was better for the plants and for them to flourish. This was about 12,000 to 14,000 years ago when this started happening. So that global span that we're looking at, and you're going to read about in your chapters, I want to bring that in a little bit. And I want to talk to you about the Mississippian culture. Again, this is what I specialize in. So I'm going to force myself to talk a little fast because if not, I'll get hung up on something and we'll be here forever. So the Mississippian period, there is some argument, but for the most part, it runs from about 1000 AD Some people take it up to about 1600 AD. I like to cut it off a little bit earlier when we get contacts such as Hernando de Soto kind of coming into the area. Things kind of change after contact, so I don't focus a lot on post-contact, though some people do, but that is where I kind of cut my timeline off. So the Mississippian cultural period mostly dominated the southeastern United States and up into the Mississippi River Valley. You do, of course, get outliers as you do in everything. And one of the places that I want to discuss with you is a site called Cahokia. It is in Collinsville, Illinois, which is near St. Louis. And it was the largest pre-contact um, native city. We're going to use the word city here. That's kind of giving you a mental image of its large expansiveness here. City in North America. So of course we've got things a lot further south that would rival this, but this was the largest that we had up here. So this, what you're looking at here on the left, it's called Monk's Mound. It is absolutely huge. You cannot see very well unless you could zoom in, but there's staircases going up it, and people look really small as they're going up. And you can't walk up it. If you're anywhere near St. Louis, you go on vacation in St. Louis. Again, it's called Cahokia, and you can actually go walk up Monk's Mound. On the right, we've got an artistic rendering of what someone thinks the Cahokia site looks like. So I say thinks, but archaeologists have spent a really long time, decades on top of decades on top of decades. A lot of people, their entire career has just focused on Cahokia. Cahokia is a buzzword in archaeology. If you're focusing on archaeology in the United States, specifically the eastern side of the United States, it's a pretty big deal. Again, because it was the largest, right? It was the city here. So the reason I wanted to talk to you about Cahokia and the Mississippians is you're learning in your chapter what's happening with this agricultural kind of explosion globally. What exactly did we have going on here? Um, so a lot of hunting and gathering was going on pre-Mississippian period, but there was also some farming going on. Kind of think of small scale farming, maybe like what you'd have a garden plot in the back. They were pretty nomadic, so they're kind of seasonally following things around, especially like game to hunt, um, different roots and nuts, things like that that they could gather uh, again seasonally. So they're called nomadic, which kind of means they're moving around a lot. And then you've got after that kind of semi-nomadic where you're staying in one spot for maybe months and months at a time, and then you kind of move off to maybe a temporary place, and then you kind of come back. And then after that, we've got where we're kind of sedentary, really not moving anymore. You might go off on like hunting trips and things, but you're coming back to a location that's not really moving, right? It's staying in one place. So when you get an area that's like that, that's sedentary, you're not having to pack up your stuff and haul it, anywhere else anymore. You can kind of do things and grow things, especially like certain ideologies that weren't quite available to you before because you were busy. You were trying to find food. You were trying to chase animals to hunt. You were trying to pack up your stuff. You were trying to make sure you weren't in somebody else's territory. You had other things to think about. So then when you get sedentary, those things you had to think about, you don't quite have to worry about anymore. So now you discover new things to think about. And one of those is religion. So I'm not saying that religion did not exist before this period in the southeastern United States. Not at all. What I am saying is it became more structured um, than it was before. Before you had something within the group of people that was called egalitarian. Think of egalitarian and equal, both got the E at the beginning. That means everyone was kind of on the same playing field. You didn't really have someone up here and then someone down here. Once we start getting sedentary, we start getting more into agriculture, we get surpluses, we start getting like this hierarchy of, um, I don't really want to push it to say government because I don't really want to imply anything that might accidentally stick in your brain, but there were different categories of people who ruled things, which is called unegalitarian. So you're not all kind of equal now anymore. You do have someone way up here, and you do have someone way down here. And that developed due to kind of this agricultural revolution. Now, we're not on the same time scale here as we were over in the Middle East with the Neolithic Revolution. We're kind of behind with when you think of letting go with hunting and gathering. Something else I want to mention with that is when people say we went from hunting and gathering to agriculture, it almost makes it sound like this clean cut and really quick. It wasn't. It was a kind of gradual process. You didn't just stop hunting one day and all of a sudden, you're a farmer. It didn't work like that. Also, people didn't really stop hunting and gathering. Um, they think of it almost like supplementing with the agriculture, and the agriculture does eventually become bigger than the hunting and gathering, but the hunting and gathering never stopped. It didn't just stop. So it did, you could say, almost completely stop when you start getting into like colonization of areas. It didn't stop because the people necessarily wanted to farm more than hunt and gather. They just wanted to cut the hunt and gather off. It was more that the rules that were implemented on them and land being taken away kind of made this really hard for them to hunt and gather. And it was still a I would say a large part of their lives, even in a kind of ritual and religious sense, that it was very devastating when all of that was completely cut off. So it wasn't just hunting and gathering, now we're farming. It 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 didn't work like that. It was kind of a more mush together. But one thing that did happen with the agricultural revolution is it allowed for surplus of food. So you have food left over that you might not have had before in larger quantities. And when you are producing larger amounts of food, you can have a larger population, which is how Cahokia formed. Before, the different cultures were kind of spread out in their own little groups. And then during 1050 to 1100, there was a 50-year wet period in the Mississippi River Valley that kind of allowed for this explosion of a climate for plants such as maize, which is corn, to thrive on a very large scale. And once you get this very large scale of food production, again, large populations follow after that. Um, it's kind of a positive for developing societies, but it can also be a negative if something happens and you can't produce that amount of food anymore. It's always something to kind of keep in the back of your mind when climate shifts like that. Things change. Sometimes they change for the better and sometimes they don't. So this picture here on the left is just kind of an artist's rendering of what some of these elite people, so the upper here, might have looked like, some things they might have worn. Some of them have what's called regalia on, so kind of like specialized ritual clothing. So a ceremony or something could have been taking place there in that left-hand picture. And in the right, we've got some sacrifices going on. Cahokia had a lot of sacrifices. A lot of people that archaeologists find are missing their hands, missing their feet, missing their heads, various things happening. And again, that's kind of all taken place because we've been sedentary and allowed to build up not only some of these ritual complexes, such as some of the mounds, some were burial mounds, some were not. Also, this structured religion now. You, your your ritualistic specialist. So kind of think of like a priest, people who knew how to do these rituals, people who you might come to see, if you had something going on, are able to stay in one place and kind of build this base and build this following, build artifacts associated with it. You didn't want to lug all these things all over the place if you were constantly having to tear, your house and your little village down and cart it off somewhere else. So we see all of these things kind of accumulating, and all of this occurred because you were able to feed more people, because people figured out how to domesticate wild plants for their benefit. So this I just kind of threw in here. Thought it was cool. Thought you guys would think it was cool too. You've probably heard of Stonehenge. This is called Woodhenge. Why? Because it's made out of wood. So all of these are cedar posts. Cedar was considered sacred, and it was designed to align like with the solstices and the equinoxes. The Mississippians were very big sky watchers, and they kept up. They had calendars. They kept up with different constellations and things like that. So there is a recreation of this there that you can go see again if you ever get a chance to go to Cahokia. All right, I'm already at 16 minutes, so I'm trying here. Trying to hurry. The left-hand picture here is something called a Palmer Drought Severity Index. So if you can see the dates on my screen, it's really little. It might be bigger on yours. It says 1150 to 1200, so that's AD. Remember, I said we had a 50-year wet period that caused this agricultural kind of explosion in the area of Cahokia that allowed for all these people to center together and make this really large city. That mound in the front, I don't remember if I said, but that was made by something called basket loading. So it is what it sounds like. Dirt full of baskets, you load your basket, you dump your basket, and you keep doing it. Took a little bit, took a lot of dirt. So imagine the calorie deficits that people are going through performing that much work, and how many people that were performing that work. You got to feed them, right? And they got to have enough energy to keep doing that. Um, None of that would have happened without this kind of boom and explosion here in the domestication of some of these wild plants, the introduction into maize into the area. Um, Mississippians figured out how corn used to be really, really little, and they figured out how to make it a lot bigger so you could feed more people. But anyway, on the left here, we had good climate conditions. Things don't stay good forever. Unfortunately, that shifted. This Palmer Drought Severity Index measures the soil moisture in the dirt, and the darker orange-red you get, the more extreme of a drought you're having. And some of these droughts went for decades. So if you had surplus when the drought started, you probably did not have any surplus when it ended. You would kind of be in bad shape. So this did eventually, among other things, lead to, I hate to use the word collapse. I really do. I don't like that word at all. It makes it sound like something was there and then something ended, and that's normally never how it works. But there was an out migration from Cahokia. The population could no longer be supported because, again, the climate conditions was making it really hard, not only to hunt and gather, which they were still doing. It was still happening. It didn't go nowhere. But also they became very reliant on these large fields of maize, and the maize was taking an extreme hit from drought. So maize is pretty drought resistant, but I mean, nothing can just handle going for decades. without very much relief. So they outmigrated from that area. So we saw this nucleation of people due to um, figuring out, how to work with plants, how to make them bigger, how to get irrigation to them, and all those types of things. And then the opposite occurred, and the people, instead of nucleated, they became all spread out, trying to find areas where they could live. So converting a little bit back more to hunting gathering than agriculture. Like I said, it was never one or the other. It was all there. Just like if you want to think of like a pie chart, most of our pie became agriculture, and then little part down here was hunting and gathering. And when these drought conditions hit, we kind of had to swap, and the hunting and gathering got bigger again, and then the agriculture came down some. But again, it was never one or the other. I know sometimes text and things makes it seem like that, but it wasn't. And I keep talking about maize. Maize was not the only plant that they relied on. They did start relying more heavily on it than other plants, but they still had a lot of other things that they were growing. So they didn't put all their eggs in one basket, as that saying goes. So here, I said I was going to briefly mention the domestication of animals. So we know, that we domesticated dogs. Well, what did that look like over here in North America? Dogs got used for multiple purpose, so they did get used as food sometimes. They did get used kind of as pack animals to haul things around, but they also, and we see this increase in this when we get that becoming more sedentary and having a surplus of food. If you have a surplus of food, you might not need to eat the dog anymore. They became more companions. It doesn't mean some of the other still wasn't happening with being eaten or being like a pack animal, but we do see larger increases of canine burials, like intentional burials, not scraps where they were eating something and kind of, threw it like into a trash pit. Actual interments of canines, and sometimes they're even buried with items. So items like humans might be buried with different artifacts, a ceramic bowl, a ceramic bottle, maybe points, maybe shell beads, things like that. And that just kind of shows us, not with our climate changing and us domesticating plants, kind of this relationship we were starting to form with different animals also. All right, so the very last part here, sorry I went 23 minutes. I was trying to keep it under for you. There's been okay, I got to talk about another controversy first. Sorry. The video before this was longer and I tried to condense it, so I've kind of forgotten a little bit of what I wanted to talk about. But one of them was, and I don't remember who, sorry, but one of you did your discussion article in module 1 about it. It was about the whole deal of men being hunters, women being gatherers, those very strict gender roles. And now publications are coming out like, this isn't completely accurate. Women hunted too, right? Men gathered too. It wasn't a direct line as some publications have led us to believe. And this seems really new, but it's not. At least a decade, maybe longer, archaeologists have been like, hey, this is kind of like a stigma that we need to address, and it's just been really hard for it to get out there. But finally it has. News stories and things have started picking it up, so it's kind of getting out there to the public now, which is completely awesome that happens. But another kind of controversy that I wanted to talk about, and you don't have to answer this, to put it in the discussion or anything, unless you just want to. If you want to, I'm fine with that. That when we were hunter-gatherers, we had more free time on our hands than we do, say, now, after the large expanse of agriculture that we have. Now, I also think we have a higher population. Before the Neolithic Revolution, there was like, I don't know, 7 million people. And then I think we like pretty rapidly in a few years following that went up to like 70 million people. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it was a pretty big jump, right? So now you have more people that you have to support, kind of like Cahokia did. At first, they didn't have a lot of people to support. Conditions went really well. They got really good at agriculture and the development of wild plants from domesticated plants. You also now have that burden of you got to feed more people. So we have more people right now. Um, but let's say we went back to the hunting and gathering and possibly a less population that we had to provide food for. Would we have more freedom that way? Or do we have more freedom now? Just something for you to kind of ponder, especially after you read chapter 10. Make sure you read that. Go ahead and get your discussions done for that. I've got your module 2 discussions done. Got a little bit of announcements up for you about that. I'm fixing to sit down here in just a minute and start working on your assignment that you had for module 2. And please remember you've got like a journal for module 3, you've got a discussion, and you've also got, I believe it's part B on your milestone for your project. So don't forget those. Make you a little note or an alarm or something. And if you need help with any of it, let me know. And I will talk to y'all later. Have a good week.